A late spring morning, the air still cool, a thin veil of mist curling lazily over the stillness of Silverpine. This was a neighborhood of expensive wooden houses by the lake, where sunlight draped itself like silk through the fog, painting the water in muted glow. Stone-paved streets lay spotless and dry, lavender bushes on either side already blooming too early, their pale purple swaying gently. At the far end of the road appeared a tall black man, Elliot Monroe, early 30s, broad-shouldered, skin dark as riverstone, eyes deep like the lake in drought. His gray coat was worn, the white shirt beneath slightly creased, collar uneven in quiet simplicity. In one hand, he dragged a weathered suitcase, in the other, a ring of keys. His steps were calm, unhurried, the gait of someone who had walked through too many streets without leaving footprints behind. He stopped in front of a lakeside house. Brown timber walls, sloped roof lined with moss, wooden steps curling up to the porch. A lone maple tree stood sentinel in the yard, as if greeting a man returning after a long winter. Elliot narrowed his eyes at the roofline, as if aligning memory with reality. A faint smile brushed his stern face. He climbed the steps, keys in hand, but before the key met the lock, he froze. The door was wide open. Out stepped a woman in heels that struck the porch with sharp rhythm. She was in her 50s, white, full-figured, short blonde hair curled inward, lips painted a bold crimson. Dorothy Whitmore, chairwoman of the Silverpine Homeowners Association, stood planted at the doorway, hands on hips like a warden catching a trespasser.
"You there, black man, who are you?"
Her voice shrilled across the porch.
"Dragging your things into someone else's home? What did you steal?"
Elliot's reply was steady, low but cutting. "This is my house." The words cracked the silence like a detonation. 1 second. 2. Wait a second. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps us. Then Dorothy barked out a laugh, rough, scornful. She turned toward the crowd gathering behind her, waving dismissively, as though swatting a beggar. Only now did Elliot notice the dozen people inside and outside the house. The scent of wine and roasted meat drifted out. Crystal glasses and neatly arranged dishes cluttered the porch table. They were all neatly dressed, middle-aged, mostly white, and now every pair of eyes pinned him down. "Police! Call the police!" Dorothy screeched, pulling out her phone. Within minutes, 2 white officers in blue uniforms strode into the yard, trailed by curious neighbors. Dorothy wasted no time, claiming she had bought the house 2 weeks ago, hosting her welcome party today. She flashed stamped documents, signatures inked. A gray-haired man with metal-rimmed glasses nodded firmly. "Everyone knows she's the new owner." The officer turned to Elliot.
"You're saying this is your home?"
"Yes, I stay here every year around this time. My keys still fit, but all the original papers are inside. Without documents, keys aren't enough. Name? Can you prove your identity?" Elliot produced his ID. The officer glanced, then shook his head. "We still need to follow procedure." The crowd's eyes weighed on him. Some averted. Some lifted their phones to record. A woman muttered, "Imagine claiming to be the owner." A man shrugged. "If he really lived here, wouldn't people know his name?" The officer stepped forward, gentle but firm. "Sir, we'll need you to come with us." Elliot said nothing. His eyes blinked once, slow. He set the suitcase down, unmoving as cold steel locked around his wrists. The click was small, but it cut through the air like a blade through glass. Dorothy folded her arms, triumphant. "Good thing we're vigilant. Who knows how many homes a drifter like this would try to claim." Led away, Elliot walked upright, no bowing, no begging. His face shuddered, a storm caged behind calm skin. He didn't look back at the house, nor at the crowd. He moved through them like a shadow slipping past daylight. The crowd parted. Somewhere behind him, a tongue clucked. "Looks just like some homeless vagrant sniffing for scraps." The holding cell at Silverpine District Station was little more than a gray box, concrete walls pressed in close, the hum of fluorescent light spilling pale across a stained floor. A steel chair sat opposite a scarred wooden table. On the wall, a faded sign preached justice and order, the words as washed out as the faith of anyone dragged into this place. Elliot Monroe sat upright, wrists still burning from the cuffs just removed. His shirt clung in wrinkled patches of sweat, his face calm but unsurrendered. The eyes gave him away, eyes that had known silence too long, and the weight of never being believed. The door opened. A young white officer entered, folder in hand. Rick Donovan. He dropped it on the table, arms folded. "Here's the deal, Monroe." His voice was flat, worn smooth from saying it too many times. "Mrs. Whitmore has a signed, notarized deed. Land records checked out. She's the HOA chair. No reason for her to lie." "I've lived in that house 9 years," Elliot replied, voice steady, low. "Every summer. I have the key. Keys can be copied." Rick cut him short. "You want us to believe you? Show papers." Elliot's pause stretched, heavy. Finally, quietly, "They're inside the house." Rick snorted. "Convenient." A voice from the doorway chimed in. A balding, middle-aged officer leaned against the frame. Carl Peterson. His lips curled in a sneer. Another black guy thinking he's special. Reads too many novels, thinks life's a movie. Rick's brow lifted. "What's your line of work?" Elliot met his eyes. "I'm a writer." The room froze, then broke in laughter. "A writer?" Carl barked. "With those hands? Writing for who, other beggars?" Rick chuckled. "Log scribbles online, calls them books, figures." Elliot didn't answer. His gaze dropped to his hands. Hands that had written whole worlds into being, tapping through nights of hunger and cold. Hands that had carried stories of hope into pages strangers once called beautiful. Now they sat useless on cold steel, unable to save him. He explained everything. The house bought with earnings from 3 successful novels, his life split between cities, mountains, cheap studios, his dislike for the spotlight, his love of solitude, the papers locked upstairs in the bedroom drawer, the one place he always secured before leaving. But truth carried no weight here. The law bent to ink and stamps, not memory and words. Dorothy Whitmore had the title, the status, the clean record. To the world outside, she was credible by default. Elliot was booked for verification. He knew what that meant. Weeks in limbo, unless a lawyer stepped in. Weeks he didn't have. That night, he lay on the iron cot, staring at the mold-stained ceiling. Around him, the soundtrack of confinement. A drunk raving in the next cell, water dripping slow into a drain, officers' boots thudding past. Memories rose uninvited. Detroit, a mother and grandmother scraping together survival, a father gone before memory formed, school days filled with fists, locked bathrooms, and nerd scum scrawled across his locker. No basketball, no trash talk, just books. Writing became his rebellion, his only escape. He had written in candlelight, on scraps salvaged from office bins, in hunger and darkness. He had written when no one read, until one day, under a false name to dodge the prejudice, his words were printed, and another day, they bought him the house by the lake, his sanctuary. Now that house was gone, claimed, occupied, turned against him. Outside, the video of his arrest spread. A black man in cuffs before a lake house, fodder for every whisper. Looks like a bum. No way he owns that. If it's his, why's no one heard of him? Betty did something shady to get the cash. Thank God for Mrs. Whitmore. Alone, with no family left, no friends, no advocate to call, Elliot sat swallowed by silence. His agent only knew him as the anonymous client behind an email and a bank account. Trust meant nothing here. Worst of all, he couldn't even set foot in his own house to prove he belonged. Under the glare of the fluorescent lights, Elliot felt it for the first time. His words, his pen, his imagination were powerless. For the first time, he was a man with no voice. 3 days after the Silver Pine incident, it seemed as though the story had slipped into oblivion, or more accurately, had been neatly boxed in by public prejudice. A black drifter, illegally trespassing in a home that clearly wasn't his. A responsible HOA chairwoman who had acted swiftly and correctly. That was the narrative, and the crowd swallowed it whole. But social media, as unpredictable as a shifting tide, had other plans. On a small forum for underground literature, A post appeared. "I know the man in that video. He's the author I've always admired." The post was signed by Mira Daniels, 27, a part-time literature teacher in Boston, and a woman whose obsession with books bordered on devotion. She recounted how, years ago, she had once taken a cross-country bus ride just to attend a rare signing by E.M. Blake, a reclusive writer known for short stories steeped in pain and hope. The event lasted barely 2 hours. No press, no live stream, no selfies, just signatures, eye contact, and handwritten notes from a man who always hid behind his words. "When I saw the video of the man in handcuffs outside that lake house," Mira wrote, "I felt a jolt. I knew those eyes, I knew those hands. They were the same ones that signed my copy of Days by the Wind Slope. And then it struck me. He once wrote about a house by the lake, a refuge in a world that refused to believe in dreams." Mira dug through Blake's old blog. Buried deep, she found an essay titled "The Last Soliloquy of Spring." In it, the writer described a house in aching detail. The slanted west-facing roof catching the sunset, the weathered railings on the porch, the ancient maple tree shedding its leaves 3 days before Easter each year. Every detail matched the house in the viral video. Mira's pulse quickened. No one could describe a home with such intimacy unless they had lived there. Without hesitation, she called her closest friend from college, Asher Wang, a Chinese-American attorney working in property law, based of all places in Silver Pine. "Asher, I think a scam is happening right under your nose," she blurted, voice shaking. Asher was skeptical, but Mira's urgency pushed him to pull the records. Minutes later, the truth appeared on his screen. The property at 27 Lakeview Drive had been legally owned by Elliot Monroe since June 2015. No transfers, no sales, no gifts, no inheritance filings. 9 years of undisputed ownership. Asher frowned. "Then what exactly did Mrs. Whitmore file? How did it pass certification?" "That," Mira replied, "is what we need to find out." Together they dug. Asher used his legal clearance to examine contracts and notary records. Mira combed through Blake's writings, blogs, and rare interviews, piecing together every personal detail that could serve as corroboration. Within 48 hours, the fraud unraveled. Dorothy Whitmore, the HOA chair, had colluded with a realtor named Greg Halverson. They fabricated a sale, forged notary stamps, and slipped fraudulent ownership papers into HOA files that, strictly speaking, had no authority over state land records. Her motive? Gambling debt. Asher uncovered records of nearly $300,000 owed to loan sharks. Desperation had driven her to steal a house she assumed was vulnerable, belonging to a man with no close neighbors, no family nearby, and no frequent visits. "She thought he'd show up mid-June, like every year," Mira muttered. But this time Elliot came early, and her scheme fell apart. Armed with official property deeds, notarized originals, and evidence of fraud, Asher submitted the case to investigators. At the same time, Mira posted her findings online, this time under her verified name as someone who had met the author in person. The post exploded. Readers of E.M. Blake rallied. Hashtags like "Justice for Elliot" spread like wildfire. Hundreds voiced outrage, demanding the case be reopened and the truth acknowledged. The media followed. Local stations swarmed Silver Pine. Headlines blared, "The writer behind the handcuffs is HOA power being abused." The mysterious owner of the lake house, long assumed to be a businessman or political recluse, was revealed as the dreamy black man the neighborhood once mocked. Dorothy herself had scoffed to neighbors that the previous owner was a drifter, some nobody with no past. She never expected that nobody to be a published author. His words quietly etched into the lives of readers across the country. One passage from The Last Soliloquy of Spring struck Mira hardest. "I didn't buy this house because it was near the lake. I bought it because it was far from prejudice." Yet prejudice had found him, knocking at his very door. This time, however, he was no longer alone. The voices of readers armed with truth, evidence, and unshakable compassion were rising with him. News of the Silver Pine house fraud erupted across the morning broadcasts. With evidence in hand from attorney Asher Wang's office and confirmation from the county registrar, police issued an arrest warrant for Dorothy Whitmore, the HOA chairwoman who had once declared before the neighborhood, "That house is mine." When officers arrived, she was still in her crimson designer dress, lounging on a leather chair, a glass of wine untouched by her side. She barely managed to stammer, "Are you insane? I'm the HOA." Before the cuffs snapped shut. The charges listed were heavy: forged property deeds, contract fraud, unlawful seizure, abuse of office, deliberate falsification of records. As she was led away, creditors swarmed the home she had been hiding in. Victims of her fake investments, phantom real estate deals, and black market loans shouted, hurled debt notices over the fence, even blasted megaphones through the night. What had once been Silver Pine's most serene street now looked like the set of a feverish crime drama. Within 48 hours, the entire HOA board was dissolved. Failure to supervise, complicity, or outright collusion, no excuse was enough to save them. Meanwhile, at the police station, a different scene unfolded. Elliot Monroe, the quiet black novelist who had spent 3 days behind bars with no grounds, was finally brought face to face with the officers. Lieutenant Henderson, the white middle-aged man who had been the first to cuff him, struggled to meet his eyes. We're sorry. This was a grave mistake. Your property has been restored, all records cleared. You'll be compensated if you wish." Elliot said nothing. A nod. His gaze empty. No hatred, no relief. Just the hollow silence of a man buried in mud for 3 days with nothing more than his skin and a battered suitcase. When he returned home, no one waited at the door. Yet the wooden gate was open. The porch steps stood as they always had, the maple shedding its leaves in rhythm with his memory. Only this time, the light of dusk painted them gold, as though nature itself whispered an apology. The old key slid into the lock without resistance. The final, undeniable proof: this house had always been his. Neighbors gathered with police and community officials to witness his return. Among them, Mr. Moretti, 65, a silver-haired veteran, shuffled forward. I thought you were homeless. Forgive me. I saw you around, but never recognized." Elliot's smile was faint, his voice a breath of wind. "It's all right. People only see what they want to see." Another neighbor stepped closer. Lisa, a young mother cradling her child, her face flushed with shame. "I once told my son to stay away from you. I'm sorry." Elliot gave a quiet nod. He needed no apologies, no explanations. What he needed was silence, space to mend. Days later, he reached out to the two who had shifted the tide: Mira Daniels, the devoted reader, and Asher Wang, the steadfast lawyer. His email was brief, courteous, sincere: a thank you and an offer, perhaps a meeting or a signed manuscript as a token of gratitude. Mira declined gently. "I only did what anyone who believes in fairness would have done. If I may receive a book, I'll treasure it. But please keep your privacy. Your words are enough. They've already connected us." Asher, too, declined, citing work. Yet at the end of his message, one line made Elliot chuckle: "When you publish the last soliloquy of spring, save me a signed copy. I want to tell my wife I once saved a writer." That evening, Elliot sat alone on the porch. The sun sank over the lake. Ducks broke the water's surface, leaving ripples that caught the fading light. In his hands lay a worn leather notebook, its edges frayed, its pages yellowed by years. He wrote. Sometimes the pen feels soundless, until you realize it was the loudest voice saving you all along. That night, Elliot began his next novel. It told of a hidden writer, falsely accused, stripped of his home, yet rescued by his own words, and by strangers whose hearts cut through fog like headlights. It was not an indictment. It was an anthem for awakening, for those who chose to listen instead of judge, who chose to stand instead of hide. And Elliot knew, no matter how many springs would pass, no matter how heavy the fog or how strong the wind across the lake, the pen in his hand would never fall silent again. Message. Sometimes, in a noisy world thick with prejudice, silence is mistaken for weakness. Yet some voices don't rise through shouting, they echo through actions, or through words written down. Elliot never screamed to prove his innocence. He let the truth and those who still believed in decency speak for him. His story isn't one of bitterness, but a reminder. Never judge a person by the color of their skin or the battered suitcase they carry, because inside, they may hold an entire world, one that's rewriting life itself.